So hello, and thank you very much for joining us today from wherever in the world you may be. My name is Margamon Farid, and I work for the International Coral Reef Initiative Secretariat, which is a global partnership for the preservation of coral reefs. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our next For Coral webinar within our series in partnership with the Reef Resilience Network and the NBSAP Forum, hosted under the United States of America Secretariat. And the topic today is integrating coral reefs into national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So just before we start, I have some quick housekeeping to go through. So please remain muted throughout the call. Should you wish to speak, please click the raise the hand feature in the reaction section, and we'll then allow you to take the floor and you'll be able to unmute yourself. Presenters will have control of their own screen, so in the case of any technical issues, please just let me know, and I've got a backup copy of your presentation. The presentations will be delivered in English only, but there is interpretation in French and Spanish. At the bottom of your screens, you should be able to see this symbol here, and that will allow you to integrate and change between each of the interpretation channels. For the best quality audio experience, we recommend using a headset and microphone if possible. As you can see, the meeting is being recorded and it will be shared alongside the meeting's presentations via the dedicated events page after the webinar. And we kindly encourage each participant to have their video on throughout the entire duration of the meeting, particularly for the question and answer session, which we will have. And this will enhance the overall meeting experience. We have a great agenda today, which will last about 90 minutes. And we'll start with welcoming remarks from Joseph Appiah before moving on to the presentation topics. This will include an introduction to a guide on integrating coral reefs into national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Then we'll hear from case study 1, the French Overseas Territories, before hearing from case study 2, the Republic of the Philippines. And then we'll move into monitoring the biodiversity plan. How can biodiversity finance plans support NBSAPs, and the NBSAP Forum, a tool to support countries? We'll then have a question and answer. Hopefully we have time for that before our concluding remarks and thank yous. So I'm pleased to introduce you to Joseph Appiah, the coordinator of the Marine, Coastal and Islands Biodiversity Programs of Work at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. At the CBD Secretariat, Joseph works with governments, international organisations and other stakeholders to facilitate the implementation of the Convention and the achievement of global goals for biodiversity. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Margot, and indeed thanks to ICRI, the Reef Resilience Network, and the NBSAP Forum for organizing this webinar and for inviting us to engage. And thank you also for your work on NBSAPs. This is a really important topic that is actually the central driving force of how the convention is translated into action. And it's fantastic to see you engaging on this work. I do realize I need to probably start sending a newer photo, as I think I'm far too much older now than I at least certainly look much older now than I do in that photo. So have to update that, but lots of things for us to do. So that's certainly one of them for me. So it's my pleasure to be with you all here in this webinar on integrating coral reefs into national biodiversity strategies and action plans, which we call NBSAPs. I'm sure some of you are familiar with NBSAPs, some of you perhaps less so, but this is a very important mechanism under the Convention on Biological Diversity. So the global community took a massive step towards positive change with the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework by the Conference of the Parties to the CBD in December 2022. This new framework aims to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity and, by 2030, put biodiversity on a path to recovery. It includes a set of outcome-oriented goals to be achieved by 2050 and action-oriented targets to be achieved by 2030. This framework contains perhaps the most ambitious set of goals and targets that we've ever seen for nature at the global level. The action that will be driven by the Global Biodiversity Framework could not be more timely in view of the recent announcement of the 4th mass coral bleaching event. And if we hope to combat the effects of this event, we need to make sure that the Global Biodiversity Framework is put into practice. And this is accomplished through the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans. Sorry. These are the key mechanisms by which the global aspirations and commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity are brought to the national level. NBSAPs are where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We know full well that one-size-fits-all approaches do not work. Global commitments need to be translated into the unique environmental, socioeconomic, and cultural contexts of the more than 196 parties to the convention. NBSAPs are also an important tool to engage the broad range of actors that need to be mobilized as part of an all-of-society approach, and an articulation of how biodiversity action fits into broader plans and priorities of each country. Sadly, there is often insufficient attention on NBSAPs, which limits how effectively CBD commitments are translated into action and how much NBSAP development and implementation are supported across the range of stakeholders that need to be engaged. So it's really encouraging to see how ICRI and the coral reef community have been mobilizing to focus more squarely on NBSAPs and means to better engage coral reef issues into these critical national implementation mechanisms. I look forward to hearing about this work, as well as inspirational stories and sources of support to see how we can scale this work up. Because if we hope to have a better future for corals, we need to work hard to put the global biodiversity framework into practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those great welcoming remarks, Joseph. I particularly like what you said about engaging a broad range of factors. I think that's super important. Next, we're going to hear from Simon Harding, who is the co-chair of ICRI's ad hoc committee on integrating coral reefs into NBSAPs. He has over 25 years of professional experience working in marine and coastal ecosystems, mainly in tropical environments, and he's played a huge and integral role in the creation of this guidance document. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Margot. Okay, I'll just get my screen up. How's that? Is that everybody can see that?
We see it very well.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to give an overview of the guidance document that we developed working with ICRI. And this is how to integrate coral reefs into NBSAPs. We just heard about from Joe. So firstly, I'll just give you an overview of the guidance document. In the introduction, there's sections on NBSAPs and their alignment with the new framework, and there's a little bit about the NBSAP ad hoc committee that ICRI set up. The main section is section 2, which is the actual guidance for integrating coral reefs and associated ecosystems, which we refer to mangroves and seagrass beds as well. The next section is the case studies, which we can hear about later, 2 of them. There's also section 4, which is about available resources you can use for NBSAP revision. And then finally, there's some step-by-step guidance, which is 10 steps of how to integrate coral reefs into your NBSAP. So firstly, as we've heard, I mean, NBSAPs really are the main vehicle for the implementation of the CBD at the national level. They're really a key component. It's all about enhanced planning and monitoring, reporting, and also reviewing for the framework. And the last COP, there was a decision 15.6, and this is about the CBD requesting parties to submit revised or updated NBSAP. So we've used this this decision and the guidance in this decision to really shape guidance that we've developed for coral reefs, associated ecosystems. Just to mention the ad hoc committee, so this was set up, adopted at the last ICRI meeting in Hawaii last September, and two main objectives of the committee are to develop the guidance document for NBSAPs to integrate coral reefs, and also to develop national case studies. So the guidance document that's available meets these objectives in terms of the guidance, but also in terms of the case studies. The main section on the guidance is split up into 5 subsections. So, and the first one talks about looking at the key stresses and drivers of ecosystem degradation, focusing on coral reefs. The next section gets into the detail about how to review and update the NBSAP using the combination of the CBD guidance and the ICRI guidance in the document. There's a section on the targets and indicators in the GBF, in the framework, and how these relate to coral reefs. And there's also some information about implementing the NBSAP, taken from the literature about leverage points and policy recommendations. Lastly, there's information about existing coral reef indicators and looking at the ones that were recommended by ICRI when the framework was being developed using another ad hoc committee. So if we go to the first point about drivers of ecosystem degradation and stresses. So it's really important to either identify these if they're not being really looked at before when you're reviewing looking at the NBSAP, or to review the status of the stresses and the drivers at the national and the sub-national level, and think about how they can be used to develop interventions to address those and to put those into the NBSAP. But the interventions that are developed should also be linked to the action targets within the framework through national target setting. And overall, it's important to engage with all relevant actors to make sure that the latest information is collected so you really understand the main threats and impacts affecting coral reefs and associated ecosystem within your country. The next section talks about the actual guidance. So in the Annex 1 of the CBD decision, there's the guidance for revising your NBSAP. And this covers a lot of different topics like reviewing the NBSAP, stakeholder engagement, political support, concrete actions, and targets and indicators. So we've gone through all of these points, and we've made suggestions in the ICRI document how to integrate coral reefs when you're developing your NBSAP, and how to slot in coral reefs for all of these topics that are listed in the CBD guidance. There's also, and that's an annex in the guidance document. There's also another annex, Annex 6 at the bottom mentioned there, that gives a specific coral reef example how to complete the CBD online template for national targets, just so people can see how that can be done, thinking about coral reefs and associated ecosystems. To pick out one example, so in the CBD guidance, in paragraph 7, it talks about reviewing the existing NBSAP and to assess alignment with the framework. And it mentions a lot of different elements, such as implementation gaps, the existing goals and targets, effectiveness of past actions. So this is all aspects of what the previous NBSAP was, and then looking at that and updating it for the new framework. So when you're developing your new NBSAP, you've got to think about all of these points really, with it sort of through the lens of coral reefs and associated ecosystems. So you really want to strongly integrate these ecosystems into your NBSAP as much as possible. The next section talks about the relevance of the targets in the framework to coral reefs and associated ecosystems. And we've gone through all of the targets and suggested if they're primary or secondary targets. But it also gives examples of actions how you can meet goal A for the framework for coral reefs for the first 11 targets. So how you can address the key direct drivers of biodiversity loss, and that's another annex in the guidance document. And it's really important to consider the whole of the framework, all the goals and targets, and particularly the cross-cutting ones. If we just show you on this slide that we've gone through the targets and we've listed them as either primary targets or secondary in terms of how relevant they are to coral reefs. But we've also split them according to the best drivers of change that was published in 2019. So down there on the left-hand side, you can see that overall, nearly all of the targets listed are relevant to coral reefs. I think it's like 21 out of 23 of the targets in the framework. The next section talks about leverage points and policy recommendations, and this was taken from recent literature. So I've just picked out some leverage points that we've listed in the guidance document that can be thought about for when you're developing your NBSAP. So examples here are improving communication, translating targets into concrete measures, defining clear responsibilities for meeting those targets. Another one further down is strengthening the legal status of the NBSAP and/or enshrining targets into national laws, which can help to deliver targets over time. In terms of the previous indicators, so ICRI recommended a number of indicators when the framework was being developed. There were 6 healthy coral reef indicators that you can see there, like live coral cover or coral reef extent. And there was also some other indicators that were proposed for development. So we looked at that, and from this you can see that most of the healthy indicators are actually in the framework, either as complementary or headline indicators in that top table. But one of the priority indicators for development is also being included in the framework, which is really good, and that's the red list of ecosystems as headline and complementary indicator. The next section talks about the case studies that were developed. So there's 3 new case studies, and we can hear about 2 of those later on. So therefore France, the Philippines, and Palau. But the document also includes some other case studies that were developed in a previous report by UNEP WCMC in 2022. So these are for coral reef countries. There's 6 of those there as well that can be looked at, and all of the case studies are linked to 4 themes that were used in the Brooks report, and depending on the type of integration for coral reefs, so that they're listed there. So there's addressing causes of biodiversity loss, reducing direct pressures, safeguarding species and ecosystems, or enabling and enhancing implementation. So there's quite a few case studies that can be looked at in the guidance document, and there's 3 new ones that have been developed, available within those. The next section talks about the available resources. So it gives you a summary of ongoing initiatives and resources available for NBSAP revision. And I've just listed the main ones there, that the information, there's information provided in the guidance document. Just to pick out a few, there's the Early Action Support Project for the framework, and the NBSAP Forum, which is, I think we're going to hear about also, as well as Biofin. But there's others as well, by WWF and TNC, which are quite useful resources as well. And also the Secretariat has produced some good resources. The next two slides are the actual step-by-step guidance points. I'm not going to go through them one by one because I pretty much covered them in the presentation already. But some of the things that weren't talked about are developing a timeline to start with, to try and make sure you can submit the revised NBSAP before the next COP. But it's not compulsory that it can be submitted afterwards, but it would be helpful if it's submitted before. And also establish a national work group for NBSAP revision to move the process on. There's some of the things I've talked about already there for the presentation. There's the next 5 steps there, and again, it's talking about the different parts that we just discussed, but an important area is to incorporate mainstreaming into the NBSAP, so you can engage with all the sectors who are involved with coral reefs or having an effect on coral reefs, as well as the sectors, stakeholders, indigenous peoples and local communities. Really important on that engagement side there. So that's pretty much my presentation. The guidance document is available online on the ICRI website, and there's a QR code there as well if people want to use that. Thanks very much. That wasn't too much over time.
Thank you so much, Simon. It was great to have you give us a detailed overview of what the guidance entails, and also the suggested elements for integrating coral reefs and associated ecosystems. Our next speaker is Antoine Paybal, and since 2019, he has been a Marine Biology and Coral Reefs Policy Officer at the Ministry of Ecological Transition of France. As such, he is in charge of coordinating the French Coral Reef Initiative, IFRICOR, alongside the Ministry of the Overseas. Over to you, Antoine.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my presentation. So normally you should see it displayed full screen. Okay,
see
perfect.
It all good.
I'm going to start. So thanks. Oops, I was at the end. Sorry for that. Okay, so first I'm going to explain as a bit of context where are the French coral reefs located. So France hosts nearly 60,000 square kilometers of coral reefs, which makes up around 10% of the global coral reef area. And these reefs are located in the 3 oceans, Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific. Our coral reefs are all located in our overseas territories. There are 11 of them, and they all have different constitutional status and different degrees of autonomy. So some of them can rule over their environment, and some of them have to follow the national rules. Also, it's important to have in mind that 90% of our coral reefs are found in the Pacific, so namely in New Caledonia and in French Polynesia. They are important players for us. And given all these facts, France has an important responsibility and made commitments, and is committed to protect coral reefs through national policies and regional and international cooperation. So coral reefs in France are subject to pressures and impacts that comes from human activities And these pressures and impact will contribute to damage and contribute to the degradation of coral reefs. So the most important drivers of coral reef loss in our overseas are the coastal activities and the urbanization, which cause the degradation of coastal water quality. It's a very important factor. Second one is the activities at sea. Among them, there are the fisheries, the anchoring, the activities of leisure or tourism. They all contribute to physical destruction and can have also an impact on the water quality. And third one is the more local or regional drivers, such as disease or non-indigenous species spread. So all these factors contribute to damage the coral reefs. And in addition to that, we have to keep in mind that there is the climate change and its effects add up to these local or regional pressures. And climate change is the main indirect driver of ecosystem loss. And it's especially true when we speak about coral reefs. And one last important thing to have in mind when speaking about pressures and impacts of human activities is accumulate, and it's this accumulation of pressures that is the key to understand the loss and degradation of ecosystems. And it's important to have this in mind to understand also the dynamic of coral reefs evolution over time. So on this slide, you can see like a figure displaying the resilience effect and the slowly decrease of coral reefs. So just to show it. And so now, what is the current status of French coral reefs? So since 2016, we have a law, the biodiversity law, that require the French Coral Reefs Initiative, ICRI, and also the French government to assess and report on the health status of coral reefs and associated ecosystem every 5 years. So it's a legal request. So we have to do that every 5 years. Our last results were published in 2020. And these results show that we have 2 classes of territories. We have territories with low population densities that are subjected to low or moderate anthropogenic pressures. And in these territories, the coral reefs are generally in good conditions, and 7% of them are still in good to optimal condition, with a stable trend since the last assessment. And the second class is territories with a higher population density and higher anthropogenic pressures. And in these territories, most of them are in the French Indies and also in the Indian Ocean. For most of them, the coral reefs are damaged. And in fact, 62% of coral reefs are degraded to very degraded state. And here as well, the trend is stable since the last assessment, with a stronger trend to degradation nonetheless. So having all this in mind, so France included coral reefs in its national biodiversity strategy. And this national biodiversity strategy sets goals and targets to 2030. And it is our main contribution to the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This document, this strategy is structured around 4 strategic axes and contains 40 measures and 200 actions. So the 4 axes are to reduce the pressures on the biodiversity, to restore degraded biodiversity wherever it's possible, to mobilize all stakeholders, and to guarantee the means to achieve these ambitions. in this strategy, coral reefs are integrated under Axis 1, Measure 1, which is to strengthen the national strategy for protected areas to reach 30% of lands and seas under well-managed protected areas and 10% under strong protection. So directly linked to the GBF. And more specifically, there is the Action 7, which is dedicated to strengthening the protection of coral reefs in the overseas territories. And it's in this action that we will find all we need to do to protect our reefs under this strategy. So first point is the protection at sea, because this strategy supports the implementation of the Coral Reef Action Plan, which is a national action plan, and targets the protection of 100% of our coral reefs by 2025. But the National Biodiversity Strategy also sets a new target of having 50% of our coral reefs under strong protection by 2030. And for today, we are at a little bit more than 67% of our coral reefs protected by a marine protected area, and 27% are strongly protected. These numbers came from a study that was led in 2019, and since 2019, there have been few MPAs that were created in New Caledonia and French Polynesia, so the numbers should be more around 70% of coral reefs under protection. And next to this protection at sea, we also have actions to reduce land-based pressures. And as such, the National Biodiversity Strategy also aims to improve coastal water quality by reducing land-based pollutions coming from the watershed. So here are a few actions to deal with this issue. So first is to raise the coral reefs issues in every water management policy at national and local level, especially important regarding the various degrees of autonomies of our overseas territories. This has to be raised at the local level. Also, the actions includes to support projects that reduce land-based pollutions, including nature-based solutions. And finally, to strengthen the ability of marine protected areas to constrain development projects in the catchment area to ensure they're compatible with the reef protection target. And just close to the protection of the coral reefs, the National Biodiversity Strategy also sets a target on the protection of mangroves, and it aims to protect and restore mangrove through the protection of 65% of the mangroves that we have to protect through efficient conservation measures. And the protection and restoration of these buffer ecosystems will also contribute to the improvement of coastal water quality. I have listed some final words here before my presentation is over. So the first is why it was important for us to include coral reefs into our national biodiversity strategy. So it was important because it allowed us to reaffirm the preservation of coral reefs as a national priority. It also helped us to strengthen the links between the existing plans and strategies contributing to the preservation of coral reefs, and to it also helped for the joint implementation, because we are, as explained a bit earlier, we have many strategies and action plans that already exist, and we have to implement them all together. And finally, the National Biodiversity Strategy was also really relevant to have a better integration of both land and sea issues. And I wanted just to have a last word on the issue of climate change, because our general philosophy when we protect our ecosystems is first to address the pressures that we have direct control over, such as the sea and land-based pressures. And this will help us to enable a greater resilience of the ecosystems, and here of coral reefs, to the damage caused by climate change. And also, these actions under the biodiversity strategy, they do not replace the necessary efforts to mitigate climate change, and climate action is needed to ensure the long-term preservation of coral reefs. So climate and biodiversity actions are our two legs that we have to work on them to ensure long-term preservation of coral reefs. So if you want to learn more about the few documents I presented, there are some hyperlinks in my presentation that you can refer to. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antoine. It's great to hear more about the French coral reefs and the pressures and impacts they face. But it's also interesting to see the laws that you have in place to assess and report on coral reefs over time. And also the various strategies you have undertaken to include coral reefs and associated ecosystems into your NBSAPs. Our next speaker is Horace Tupas, who leads the Coastal and Marine Management work at the Biodiversity Management Bureau of the Philippines Department of Environment and Natural Resources. She played a crucial role in developing the Philippines' flagship Coastal and Marine Ecosystems Management Program and represents the department internationally. She currently oversees the establishment of the 30x30 Network, National Blue Carbon Program, among several others, to advance the country's efforts to biodiversity conservation and climate action. So over to you, Horace.
Thank you very much, Margot. I'm just going to share my slide. Yeah. Can you see my slide?
Yes, working very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the ICRI for always considering the Philippines in such events like as this. And this is very important for us, as we are currently undertaking lots of activities that involves coral reefs and associated habitats. So we are currently setting up 5 programs at the moment that involves that includes the protection and conservation of our coral reef ecosystems. So without further ado, I'd like to proceed on the main topic, which would be our current work on the coral reefs in the Philippines, and how are we integrating our strategies into the updating of the NBSAP, or we call it in the Philippines the PBSAPs, the Philippine Biodiversity Action Strategy and Action Plan. So just a snapshot of the extent of the coral reefs in the Philippines. And the Philippines is situated at the apex of the Coral Triangle, making it as one of the biodiversity hotspots, one of the megadiverse regions in the world. So of the total of around 1.3 hectares of corals in the country, around 77,000 or 6.11% hectares are within the protected areas. Approximately 80% or 1.1% hectares of corals can be protected through the target 3 of the PBSAP, of the KMGBF. So the 30x30 global ambition, through the establishment of new protected areas under the National Integrated Protected Area System, or the recognition of other effective area-based conservation measures. So what you're seeing in the diagram is the current condition of our coral reefs in the Philippines. So later I will explain the current indicators that we are using for assessing the coral reefs in the Philippines. Current strategies at the moment, we are actually preparing for a national workshop, culmination workshop in the development of a coral reef strategy or rehabilitation and management program. And under that would be the identification of resilient reefs, which could be our priority protection areas and priority investment areas in the Philippines as well, in light of nature-based solutions. And then we are also trying to amend existing policies to strengthen and enhance the protection of the coral reefs in the Philippines. So there is one policy that we are using at the moment, Technical Guide on Biodiversity Assessment and Monitoring System, for coastal and marine ecosystems that would include coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass. So this policy, this guide is being used to identify the trends in the condition of the composition and abundance of constituent species of the coastal and marine ecosystems and its use, and to determine the extent and cover of various types of coastal and marine tools and updates and methodologies to use in terms of monitoring. So on the coral reef assessment, as I've mentioned, we're using new scale. We have already communicated this to the ICRI before. We are using the hard coral cover, so we are no longer using the 4-scale live coral cover. And then new scale for coral generic diversity as well, and we are also looking at taxonomic amalgamation units. So for the methods, for the step-by-step method, we do phototransect, and then we do data processing through the CPCE or the coral point count with Excel extensions, and then finally the analysis and interpretation in terms of cover, in terms of diversity, and the documentation of threats. So as what Franz mentioned a while ago, we also have same threats, mostly anthropogenic threats coming from land-based pollution, and also other activities at sea, such as the persistent IUF and other anthropogenic threats, and of course climate change threats as well. And right now the wave of coral bleaching. So let me now go very quickly to the updating of the Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, and how are we integrating coral reefs in this effort. So just a brief overview of how are we doing this process. So right after the COP15, so we did the debriefing by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources with the Philippines Subcommittee on Biodiversity. We have that subcommittee. It's an interagency with the participation of the NGOs and the IP group as well. So we did a debriefing of the Philippine position and the adopted decisions during COP15. And there was a pre-work already starting from January 2023, and it will last until, it lasted until June 2023. On how do we update, how do we proceed with updating our PDSAP. Then we had the experts group meeting, we have stock taking exercises, we have regional or sub-national consultations with all sectors. So it was a going 2-year process already of multi-stakeholder consultation and updating the PDSAP, because we wanted this to be a whole, not just a whole of government, but whole of a society approach of updating, so that everyone would own whatever that we will be producing in terms of the new and updated strategy and action plan. So we are targeting September to October 2024 in terms of the printing and layouting. But before that, we're already studying the CBD template in terms of submission of the updated PDSAP for the Philippines, NBSAP for the Philippines. In terms of the different targets of the KMGBF, we did clustering. We have 8 clusters. So cluster 1 would be conservation of ecosystems. That is composed of 4 targets, targets 1, 2, 3, and 12. And then we have cluster 2 on wildlife, 3 targets, 4, 5, and 9. And then the other clusters would look into the different factors that affect cluster 1 and 2, including mainstreaming strategies. So basically, coral reef, the main the clusters where coral reef is mainly integrated would be on the cluster 1 and 2, particularly on land and sea use planning, the restoration, of course 30 by 30, except for blue and green spaces, target 12. And then we are also looking into the active management of species, and then we're looking at, because there is still collection of corals, illegal collection of corals in the Philippines that still happens. So we're looking at that in terms of cluster 2 and the sustainable management and use of species. So basically, coral reefs are in the clusters 1 and 2 in terms of our updating of our NBSAP in view of the KMGBF targets. So in updating our PBSAP, we're doing special approach to achieve integrated management rather than thematic approach. And this highlights landscapes and seascapes as the canvas in which we will draw our vision of the PBSAP for 2024 to 2040. And then during the consultations, the participants were grouped according to their biogeographic regions rather than the political regional divisions in the Philippines. So we look at the biogeographic regions. So the use of biogeographic regions in grouping participants is very crucial because of ecological connectivity of the ecosystems and areas. The connectivity of these ecosystems were highlighted. Some of the workshop photos with different participants all over the Philippines. And for the next steps, we are consolidating, reviewing the dashboards. We came up with a dashboard of the different regional and local biodiversity strategy and action plans. It's not just a national, but we also trying to develop sub-national and local action plans. So with their specific targets, indicators, and activities. So we will still conduct focus group discussions and roundtable discussions with concerned other agencies and stakeholders to further enhance the dashboard. This includes our Department of Agriculture, Department of Public Works and Highways, our IP group, our local government units, local communities in enhancing the targets. And we are very thankful for the early action support grant of the JEF. We have tapped into that. So we have an existing project with JEF, and this is being implemented together with UNDP. So they are helping us very much in terms of the updating of our NBSAP. And then we are also already organizing workshops on the preparation of the biodiversity finance plan to make sure that whatever that we are targeting in the NBSAP will be implemented, and we have resources to do that. And then undergoing review of the CBD template, as I've mentioned a while ago, in terms of the submission. And aside from filling up the template, we will, as you have seen, we'll be printing and we will be coming up with the entire narrative of the PBSAP for the Philippines, and we will also be submitting that to the CBD. And one more workshop, one more national consultation is what is left for us. So we are trying to do that in July, and we hope to be able to perhaps invite some of our focal persons or representatives from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and of course, lastly, the printing and publication of the PBSAP. So that's it. I hope I gave a very quick but very relevant information for this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Horace. That was great to hear more about the work of the Philippines, particularly the timeline on how you're updating your NBSAPs. I like the whole of government and society approach that you spoke about as well, and then highlighting the next steps.
Thank you. Thank you, Margot.
Next, I'm pleased to introduce you to Gillian Campbell, who works for the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, where she is responsible for monitoring of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including national action planning. So over to you, Gillian.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to try to give a brief overview of what has been happening in the system. I think I need that. What has been happening in terms of the NBSAPs and what is the status of them. And then I was also going to go into a little bit of detail on the monitoring framework, because I think it's particularly interesting for the coral reef community. So in terms of what COP agreed to, they agreed to the rapid alignment of national biodiversity strategies and action plans with the Global Biodiversity Framework by COP16. And this would include the development of national targets. And
sorry to interrupt you, Gillian. Your sound, it's not great. We're struggling to hear you a little bit. Do you have any headphones by any chance?
You know, I've had this problem in pretty much all of my meetings lately. Let me join on my phone, and I'll do the sound on the phone and the projection on here.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
While that's happening, I'll try to get really close, and then you can see me right here. So Anyway, so in terms of the national targets, the agreement is really that you would have national targets aligned with every goal and target of the framework. Let me turn my sound off here so I can. Okay, is that better?
Yes, so
Can you
much
hear me?
better. Yeah,
Okay,
much better.
awesome. So now I'll just talk to the phone and to you. Okay, so in terms of what happens with the targets next? So then the assumption is that every country would submit their commitments to every target or their contribution to every target of the global framework. And as many of you know, these targets themselves are not specific to the marine environment, but virtually every one of them has a link with the marine environment, which I will show a little bit later on in the context of the indicators. And so if you think about Goal A, which is on ecosystem extent, obviously you would then be looking at marine ecosystems as well, the extent of coral, the extent of seagrass, similarly for protected areas. And so the idea would be that countries in their NBSAPs, they define how this would work in different environments. And I think the guidance that ICRI has been providing on how this works for coral is fantastic. And then in terms of what happens next, then at each COP up to 2030, the Secretariat will do an analysis of what's coming out of these national targets and will provide advice to COP on the current state of NBSAP development. And there's also a commitment in the guidance on the NBSAPs, which is in Decision 15.6, to align NBSAPs with other conventions and organizations in order to improve the implementation of the framework and also to contribute to its monitoring. So the first step would be, as I said, to map their existing targets to the global targets, to identify where there's gaps, to develop new targets when necessary, but to not try to develop a complete set of new targets, but to use what parties are already implementing in order to ensure that implementation is not halted during this phase of developing new NBSAPs. There's also a push from parties in what has been agreed to really ensure that there's a whole of government, whole of society approach in the NBSAP development and implementation, and that non-state actors are included. And something that's new for this round of NBSAPs in compared to the past and this round of national reporting is that there's an agreement to have national monitoring plans and to use indicators in monitoring the NBSAP and in reporting to the convention through the national reports. And the guidance on the NBSAPs does stress that it should be coherent with national circumstances, facilitate all actors, integrate the protocols that we have on biosafety and access and benefit sharing, seek synergies, promote and support increased effort, and taking into account different value systems, and as I mentioned, considering non-state actors. And I think that the work that ICRI has been doing has really helped to take this forward, and the work that you've heard in this session today to make sure that we are having a consistent approach across these different communities to looking at the marine environment. And so I just wanted to sort of highlight the process here. Right now, parties are developing their NBSAP with a monitoring framework. They're encouraged to use the headline indicators as well as other indicators. These national targets would be the basis of the national reporting, which happens in February 26. And then the headline indicators are part of that reporting template. This would then feed into a global analysis where we would analyze progress towards the global biodiversity framework at the global level and pulling together all of the data from different national reports. So this is what the process looks like. And so this is why I wanted to highlight the indicators a little bit, because of the fact that I know this is something that is really of interest to this community and where you've been involved. So the headline indicators were adopted and, as I said, are part of the reporting template, as are the binary indicators.
These are then coupled with a list of component and complementary indicators which countries may wish to use. Now, as the ATET, there was a process to develop these headline indicators. And as this technical process worked to develop the indicators, many of the complementary indicators became sort of disaggregations of the headline indicators. So as opposed to having an indicator specifically on seagrass extent, there has been a commitment to disaggregate every geospatial indicator, or it's a proposal to disaggregate every geospatial headline indicator by ecosystem functional group. And so the ecosystem functional groups are something that has been adopted by the IUCN. They've also been adopted by the UN Statistics Division, or Statistical Commission, actually. And these provide a way to try to understand different ecosystems at the national level and to map any sort of national wall-to-wall ecosystem map that a country might have with a global typology so that you could then have some comparability. And the reason why this is really useful is it would allow you to see the interchange between different ecosystem functional groups within the biome. So if in this typology at the biome level, you would have the marine shelf, and underneath this at the ecosystem functional group, you would have the seagrass meadows, coral reef, kelp forest. And so if you were only measuring at the biome level, for protected areas, for instance, if you only look at marine protected areas, you don't know what's seagrass, how much coral reef are you protecting? What about the kelp forest? Additionally, if you're in the process of restoring, if you're looking overall, you again wouldn't be able to see the difference between coral turning into, well, you wouldn't be able to see if coral is lost and seagrass grows, then your total extent of natural ecosystems could be maintained, even though you've actually lost an important area for biodiversity. And so this is the proposal, because then it would allow you to see this interchange between these different types of ecosystems. So this is what is going to SAPSTA, and this will be something that is really going to be negotiated in next month at the SAPSTA 26 meeting, and this is where this list of headline indicators along with the disaggregations is included. And there's been a series of webinars on this, which I thought people might be interested in. Particularly, I think it may be interesting for people to see the one on ecosystem functional groups, which is what I just highlighted. And then I was going to show, these are the indicators in the monitoring framework. And I went through and I highlighted which ones I think are related to the marine environment. And it became kind of a silly exercise because I ended up deciding that I was just highlighting everything, because obviously even indicators on ABS or public financing still have a marine component, but certainly the ones on ecosystem extent or the red list, by different species, or genetic diversity, or the area under restoration have direct links with the work that ICRI is doing. And so, I mean, the only indicators hardly that I didn't highlight were ones related to agriculture and forest, and it's really, or urban areas. So as you can see, I mean, most of these indicators really do have some relationship with the marine environment, again, even on participation. And so this is the list, and I think I will leave it at that. And thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thank you so much, Gillian. It's great to hear an overview of monitoring the biodiversity plan, but particularly how the indicators will be used and contribute to that global analysis. So thank you for giving us some more information on that. Our next speaker is Tracy Cumming, a Senior Technical Advisor with UNDP Biofin, overseeing the work in Eastern and Southern Europe, Central Asia and China. She headed Biofin in South Africa before joining the global team in 2017. Tracy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Margot. Just sharing. And do I have that right?
Yes, we see your presentation.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Good day, everyone, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to this talk. It's really lovely to have my head fully in coral reefs. I don't often get to do that, so it's been great listening to all the speakers. I am going to talk today about national biodiversity finance plans and how these speak to and interface with NBSAPs. So at the COP15, countries agreed to review and update their NBSAPs, as you all know, but also for the first time, we're also encouraged to develop, update, and implement national biodiversity finance plans or similar instruments. NBSAPs and biodiversity finance plans are both intended to be guiding documents for countries. The development of NBSAPs and BFPs, because we also need an acronym, are two distinct processes, but each require expertise that overlaps. And as they're being developed together, which they haven't had the opportunity of in the past, countries now have a chance to undertake these two processes in parallel and be as complementary as they possibly can. And this is what I'm going to focus on today. So I don't think you need an overview of what an NBSAP is at this point, but just as a heads up, NBSAPs will require national targets and also concrete actions, as well as national monitoring, but also the development of actions in NBSAPs should go hand in hand with the identification of financing and capacity gaps and the development of national finance plans or similar instruments. So that is from CBD decisions. So this stuff, these two things have been noted in separate decisions and discussed in separate decisions, but even the decisions kind of look at each other and say these things come together and they need to support each other. Biodiversity finance plans map out a pathway for a country to develop nature-positive finance approaches to enable the achievement of the national biodiversity goals and targets and to close the funding gap. The biofin approach to developing BFPs has a strong focus on transformative change. We don't just look at increasing resources, we also look at reducing harm and improving effectiveness of the expenditure that you have. The biofin process ensures a portfolio of complementary finance solutions from private and public sector, short and long term, and focusing on different sectors. Our methodology essentially has 4 analytical steps. The policy and institutional review comes first, the biodiversity expenditure review, the finance needs assessment, and then the biodiversity finance plan itself, which is developed based on those other 3 analytical components and more external stakeholder input. I'm going to go into more detail on each of those steps to really show you how each one of those supports NBSAP revisions. But first, I want to reflect on how NBSAPs and BFPs respond to the targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework. So as Gillian has just said, NBSAPs contain or should reflect all of the 23 targets and goals sitting in the GBF. Biodiversity finance plans help to achieve all the goals and targets because they enable NBSAPs. So they also have that broad scope of we want to make sure that all the goals and targets are actually achieved. However, the NBSAPs themselves, the actions that will be contained in an NBSAP, focus on 5 of the GBF targets. I'm not going to go into detail here, but those 5 are target 14, target 15, target 16, target 18, and the more obvious target 19. So if you read a biodiversity finance plan, what we call finance solutions are going to be covering those targets. So now into the detail. What information from the BFP analytical stages could be useful for an NBSAP revision? So firstly, looking at that analytical component, which is the policy and institutional review. The policy and institutional review includes a root cause analysis, which identifies the root causes of both positive and negative changes in biodiversity. This can highlight needs that could be addressed in the NBSAP, such as capacity challenges, weak legislation or weak enforcement of legislation, or competing objectives. When we look at positive changes that it's finding, we're looking for things that can be amplified or better funded to make sure that those positive changes in biodiversity can be better supported. It also identifies policies and legislation for biodiversity mainstream. They look at, we pull out legislation and policies that impact nature, such as broader blue economy policies, or sector policies such as agricultural development. It might point out policies that are complementary to the goals of the NBSAP, which again could be amplified. Policies that are lacking in biodiversity imperatives. For example, many green or blue development policies have very little or no focus on biodiversity, and we would pull that sort of thing out in the PIR. And it could also pull out policies that are counteractive to a country's stated goals and targets for biodiversity. The policy and institutional review also might identify non-traditional actors and programs that an NBSAP wouldn't necessarily be aware of, such as ministries responsible for infrastructure, agriculture, fisheries, finance, or economic development in the public sector, or businesses and finance sector actors in the private sector. The Biodiversity Expenditure Review determines how much is currently being spent on biodiversity and by whom. The Biodiversity Expenditure Review identifies biodiversity positive funding flows in more traditional biodiversity focus sectors, such as the obvious ones, protected area agencies or environmental ministries. But it also teases out funding flows from less traditional areas, such as production sectors or water or disaster risk reduction, that are primarily or secondarily focused on positive biodiversity outcomes. This can spotlight programs and institutions that might be aligned with the goals of the NBSAP, but which would otherwise not be identified. Given the GBF's focus on transformative, whole of government, whole of society action, this information is incredibly useful for NBSAPs, which is already trying to be much more, have much more impact beyond the traditional environmental sectors. Biodiversity Expenditure Review considers both budget allocated to nature positive actions as well as actual budget spent. Cases where there is a large discrepancy between the two may point to challenges that are best addressed within the NBSAP, such as programs to improve implementation capacity within agencies. Biodiversity expenditure reviews may also identify concerns related to the relative allocation of funds to different levels or tiers of government, for example, national or regional or local government. So you might have a biodiversity protected area responsibility sitting at national and regional and local government, but not enough funding is going to local government to actually achieve those goals that they are also sitting with. And that's the kind of thing that a biodiversity expenditure review might highlight, which an NBSAP might then want to pick up and say, okay, we need to deal with this problem through the NBSAP. The finance needs assessment is the next piece of work, which seeks to cost the NBSAP. Obviously, a costed NBSAP makes planning, budgeting, and ultimately implementation of the NBSAP much easier. It may also highlight specific actions with prohibitively high costs, which could be redesigned to achieve the same outcomes, but in a less costly manner. In order to correctly cost NBSAPs, the NBSAPs themselves need to be developed to a level of detail that is actually costable. And ideally, finance needs assessment teams are part of the NBSAP process. But I can't stress this more, that the first round of biodiversity finance plans that we developed through BioFin were done quite a few years ago now, so around 10 years ago. But in most cases, NBSAPs had already been developed and they were fixed. And almost none of them were done to a level of detail that were easily costable. We now have a chance to say, as you're developing your NBSAPs, make sure that your actions are done to a level that the finance needs assessment team can cost. And what I mean is, how many years will that take? What kind of teams will you need? Is it a once-off cost? Is it a cost spread out over years, but actually minimal? How exactly are you going to do this thing that you say, expand protected areas, restoration in certain ecosystems? The more detail that an NBSAP captures either in the core document or maybe in annexes, the easier it is to provide an accurate cost when the costing team comes in. In addition to costing the NBSAP, the finance needs assessment seeks to determine the funding gap for implementing the NBSAP. Any information provided in the NBSAP on the availability of funds for specific targets or actions will be crucial in understanding the funding gap. So looking at the final analytical step, the BFP, the Biodiversity Finance Plan, which is more of the outward facing, the document that most people know about, the finance solutions in the Biodiversity Finance Plan enable the achievement of a country's biodiversity targets and actions set out in the NBSAP. This includes finance solutions that deliver better, generate revenue, and avoid future costs and realign expenditures. For example, to support a target related to restoring degraded ecosystems like coral reefs, a biodiversity finance plan might include any one or more of the following, including funding for ecological infrastructure restoration in disaster risk reduction budgets. So a different department, a different goal, but let's make sure coral reef restoration sits in their budgets too, because it's relevant for disaster risk reduction. Repurposing harmful subsidies that are currently causing damage to marine ecosystems. Might include improving fines and penalty systems for unsustainable fishing practices. It might include raising blended finance through the Global Coral Reef Fund, or it might include payments for ecosystem services. What's important to communicate here is that a good biodiversity finance plan is developed in a way that considers a very wide range of options and then prioritizes those that are most suitable for a country context. And it's going to look very different in every different country based on the enabling frameworks, the social and political context, as well as the biodiversity context and where a country is trying to go. And in return, apart from what I've been saying about making NBSAPs costable, there are other ways that NBSAPs can help improve biodiversity finance in the country. They can include targets and actions that might, for example, would include improved spatial planning, which is beneficial for numerous finance solutions, including payments for ecosystem services or improved fees and fine systems, or targeting fiscal incentives. There might also be an opportunity in NBSAP, for example, to support ecotourism in a country, and that can be complemented by a finance solution in a biodiversity finance plan, which incentivizes ecotourism. So these two things can almost mirror each other in how they help drive not only conservation finance, but also furthering your biodiversity goals in the country. Finally, I want to talk very briefly about stakeholders. So each process, we know, is supposed to have very broad, diverse stakeholders. It's not always easy to get all the people in the room that you want to have in the room. So a shout out to NBSAP, people driving the NBSAP processes in their countries. With the BioFin approach, when we develop a national biodiversity finance plan, the Ministry of Finance sits on our steering committee, often as a co-chair. We also try to include other ministries like economic development or agriculture. And then we have task teams that also try to include these people from other sectors, these representatives from other sectors. So if those people aren't yet in the room helping to craft revisions to NBSAPs, reach out to your biodiversity finance plan colleagues and that process, and try and bring in those stakeholders into the broader NBSAP conversation. We always encourage cross-pollination between these two stakeholder groups. The NBSAPs and BFPs provide crucial roadmaps for countries to meet their CBD commitments and to create nature-positive societies and economies for the good of all people. Developing these two mutually supportive tools in a comprehensive and complementary approach can really help to achieve a more sustainable and powerful impact. And I'm looking forward to seeing how over the next few years we craft both of these tools in a way that really support each other and create real transformative change that we know we need.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for detailing how to close the finance gap through the BioFin approach, but also how BFPs help to enable the achievement of the goals and targets of the GBF. That was super interesting to learn about, particularly for someone who's not very good at finance. So our next speaker is Alexis Legigan, who works as an environment technical analyst at UNDP headquarters. He provides technical support to parties to the CBD through the Global Biodiversity Framework Early Action Support Project. So over to you, Alexis.
Great, thank you so much, Margot. Let me just share my screen real quick. Can you confirm that you see the screen fine?
Yes, we see it well.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello and good afternoon to everybody. As Margot said, my name is Alexis Legigan. I work at UNDP within the Global Program on Nature for Development, and specifically I work on the GEF funded Early Action Support Project, supporting countries in aligning their NBSAPs and ensure that their national biodiversity targets are adopted by COP16. I also wanted to thank ICRI for giving us the opportunity to speak today in this important conversation. So thanks so much for the invitation. And today I will present the NBSAP Forum as a tool to support countries in updating their NBSAPs. But before that, I would like just to provide some context and discuss briefly the importance of NBSAP updates, and also discuss the Global Biodiversity Framework Early Action Support Project, which was mentioned briefly by Simon in an earlier presentation. But as most colleagues already mentioned, and as you probably all know, NBSAPs are the main policy instruments for implementing the convention at the national level, and also a critical mechanism for countries to establish and report on their contributions to the strategic frameworks. However, in the past, progress towards addressing biodiversity loss using NBSAPs has been insufficient. For instance, in 2020, a review of NBSAPs revealed that only a third of national targets found in countries' NBSAPs were on track to be met. And the lessons learned from the last round of NBSAP updates indicate that challenges still persist in several areas, including the non-alignment of national targets with global targets, the lack of financing, plans and actions for NBSAP implementation, inadequate implementation due to delays in updating NBSAPs, also inadequate data and infrastructure for monitoring systems, and finally, a lack of political will and changes of government priorities. So through early action, basically parties can fast-track readiness to implement the framework by starting to align their national targets and working on their monitoring, finance, and policy framework, which was introduced earlier. Countries are also adopting a whole of society, whole of government approach, engaging with a range of national stakeholders from all sectors of society to revise their NBSAPs. And governments are now leading efforts to fast-track readiness and early actions to implement the framework in this decade through the early actions, the EAS project, which is funded by the GEF. And the project basically provides financial and technical support to 138 developing, small island, middle-income nations in their work to align their NBSAPs. So here is a brief overview of the project scope. I won't go into detail of these components, but the project has four main pillars, four main components. The component one is about NBSAP alignment. Component two is about the assessment of monitoring systems. Component three is about policy and institutional alignment with the GBF. And component four is about biodiversity finance. So all of these aspects are key to prepare, adopt, implement, and report on a high quality NBSAP. And our role in this project is to support countries doing just that. So the question is, how are we doing it exactly? So our team has developed a set of, well, several tools. And I would like to talk about one specifically, which is the NBSAP Forum. So the NBSAP Forum is a virtual community of practice that is supporting countries towards the their implementation of the GBF. So the version 2.0 that was launched about a year ago, May of last year, reflects the new framework and the 23 global targets. The NBSAP Forum basically is a place to ask questions, interact with international experts, and share your own good practices and experiences with other countries. And we encourage you to sign up on the NBSAP Forum and actively contribute by sharing your expertise, any challenges or solutions that you may have. And I would be grateful maybe for ICRI colleagues to share in the chat the link to the NBSAP Forum. If not, I will just share it after my presentation. It's okay as well. Thank you so much. So more specifically, the NBSAP Forum aims to support parties in finding the information that they need to develop and implement effective NBSAPs. And it is led through a partnership between the Secretariat of the CBD, UNDP, and UNEP with financial support from the GEF. And the forum brings together biodiversity practitioners and organizations who are involved in updating NBSAPs and who are able to offer support and expertise to those preparing their NBSAPs. So forum members speak about 122 unique languages. They access the forum from 194 countries, and they engage with each other in multiple languages. We actually launched the forum recently in French, Spanish, and Russian to ensure that more people can engage with it. So the forum offers to biodiversity practitioners and policymakers several functions, including an online forum to exchange timely information on the GBF goals and targets, a resource library with relevant documents and best practices on GBF targets, also an e-learning platform that provides free opportunities to build stakeholders' professional capacity, also in multiple languages, and also finally a technical help desk that is also available, providing service in English, French, and Spanish. So technical partnerships are a key element of the success of the NBSAP Forum. So we're collaborating with technical partners towards the achievement of the GBF, and the forum currently has about 20 established partnerships, which you can see here on the screen, and with ICRI being actually one of them. So we're happy to be collaborating here. And technical partners basically can engage with the forum in several meaningful ways, including sharing news, publications, e-learning opportunities with policymakers. They can also populate discussion forums with specific information on targets, and partners can also promote events that are beneficial to members, such as any workshops or webinars, such as this one. I also wanted to mention that the partnerships contribute to the development of a resource database and also provide focal points to support countries that participate in the Early Action Support Project. And this information, as well as any important updates that we have, is distributed to countries via a monthly newsletter through the NBSAP Forum. And we are always happy and open to expand our list of partnerships. So feel free to reach out to me or also my colleague Marion Marigot, who plays a crucial role in consolidating the partnerships for the forum. I will share my contact details also in the chat after my presentation. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have an interest in becoming a technical partner or just engaging in the forum. So here briefly, I'd like to talk about how to actually use the forum. It's pretty straightforward. So to make a post, you will just need to register on the forum's hosting platform, which is called the Learning for Nature. So it's very easy. You just click on register, fill out the registration form, then you have a confirmation email, and then you sign in and can start using the forum. The forum provides also several important things I wanted to mention here. So there are 23 dedicated forums for each of the GBF targets, which you can access by just clicking Enter Forum. There is also a key information from the CBD about each of the targets, which you can access by simply clicking the Read Target button. And also, there is a dedicated forum on the early action support project for those who are directly involved in the project or just have an interest in learning more about the project. And once you are signed in the website, you can just start posting. When you enter the forum, you will see the feed also with other members' posts. So to make a post, you just need to click on the dedicated box, and once you have finished your post, click on update. Once again, very straightforward. And we have a number of people and users making posts on the forum that you can access and respond to in case you require any clarification or any additional information on a given topic. And note also that you can access the content of the forum without registering, but if you actually want to exchange with peers, post something, you actually must create an account. And I'd like to remind everyone that this is completely free, of course. And as mentioned before, the resource library provides relevant information regarding best practices, technical guidance, tools, and reports on GBF targets. And resources are available in multiple languages and can be filtered by GBF target, type of resource, country, etc. So it's very easy to browse through the information here. Similar to the resource page, the e-learning catalog is available in multiple languages, and everything can be filtered by type and GBF targets. And here I'd like to just share a few key numbers about the forum. So we received more than 16,000 visitors since its launch last year. We have more than 17,000 registered users on the platform for an average of about 1,700 members per target forum. So the reach is quite significant. And finally, this will be my last slide. I'd like to share just some ways you can contribute to the forum. So what you can do is share relevant information related to the GBF goals and targets, such as news, events, publications, and learning opportunities through the forum. And you can also invite experts from your organizations to post relevant information there. And also you can just help us spread the word through your own communication channels. Thank you so much. This concludes my presentation. Thanks so much for the attention. If you have any questions also, we're here to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. It's great to learn more about the objectives of the Early Action Support Project and the work you're doing to support countries, particularly through the NBSAP Forum. So thank you very much for that. I know we did have on the agenda a Q&A, but unfortunately we have run out of time for that. So if you do have any questions, please just pop them in the chat and we'll come back to you with the answers to those quite soon. So just to add to all of the great information and discussion we've heard so far, I'd like to provide a little bit more context on ICRI and the guidance. So for those of you who may not know, ICRI is a global partnership of 101 members for the preservation of the world's coral reefs and associated ecosystems, including 45 countries that represent 75% of the world's coral reefs. ICRI has been a long-term partner to the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and ICRI's formation was announced at the first conference of the parties to the CBD in December 1994. ICRI has continued to support CBD parties over the years, including developing a recommendation to the post-2020 GBF to ensure the appropriate inclusion of coral reef ecosystems. And as you heard earlier from Simon, Antoine, and Horace, more recently, the release of a guide for integrating coral reefs and associated ecosystems into NBSAPs. Coral reefs obviously occur in more than 100 countries and territories, and whilst they only cover 0.2% of the sea floor, they support at least 25% of marine species and underpin the safety, coastal protection, well-being, food and economic security of 1 billion people. The value of goods and services provided by coral reefs is estimated at $9.9 trillion per year. To address the pressing issues faced by coral reefs in light of the recent confirmation of the 4th global bleaching event, the second in a decade, it is time to act for coral now. With that said, at the 37th General Meeting in September 2023, the ICRI General Meeting, the ad hoc committee was established in response to coral reefs and their associated ecosystems not being explicitly referenced within the adopted GBF's 4 goals and 23 targets. Nevertheless, the GBF has remained highly applicable to coral reefs and their associated ecosystems, and it's in this light that ICRI felt it had an important role to play in coordinating consistent views across its member countries, with support from its organisations, on the need for and substance of updates and revision to NBSAPs to include coral reefs and their associated ecosystems. To facilitate this process, ICRI developed this guidance to support countries, including those case studies and summary which you heard of earlier today, and we hope you found this and will continue to find this useful. ICRI became a technical partner of the NBSAP Forum, which you heard from Alexis last year, and will continue to support the work of NBSAPs in the future, as well as work with the CBD. So more information will be shared via email after the webinar, and it will include a link to the recording, presentations, and additional resources, but they can all be found on the dedicated events page as well, which you can see here. Our next webinar will take place at the same time next week, Tuesday, 14th of May, and this will be on the status of the 4th global bleaching event and the role of the global coral reef community. So again, all of this information, the agenda, can be found on the dedicated events page. So please do kindly share that on your networks and tag ICRI if possible, and we'll see you there next week. So lastly, just a big thank you to our speakers for your fabulous presentations, and to our partners of the webinar, the Reef Resilience Network and the NBSAP Forum, hosted under the ICRI chairmanship of the USA, as well as our financial supporters, the Principality of Monaco and the Government of Sweden. We'd like to thank you all for your time in attending this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one to continue our in-depth conversations on the status of the 4th global bleaching event. So thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you next time.